everyone. I want to start with a little story. And that is that before I knew much about, well, anything really, I knew about wonder. Wonder for the natural world. This is something that you might be able to relate to. When I was 6, so about the age I am here, my parents moved my sister and I to Canada. And they moved us there for my dad's work, and we landed in a typical North American suburb just outside of Toronto. And it was there that my very Dutch parents became committed to giving my sister and I a very Canadian childhood, an outdoorsy childhood, if you will. Think hiking, camping, turning over every rock to see what was underneath it, watching ants carry things 5 times their size, and listening to birds that we could not quite name. And it was through that experience that you might think that I grew up in the wilderness, right? But in fact, that could not be further from the truth. All of this happened in the margins of suburbia, in the little forgotten fields between our neighborhoods, in the forest patches that had not quite been cleared yet. That was until I saw it all vanish. In this urban sprawl environment, these tiny wild spaces that meant so much to my sister and I watched them disappear. Ironically, for subdivisions that were so similar to the one that I was growing up in. So became this distorted reality of people over there and nature over here. How odd. And as I would walk through these new neighborhoods, it struck me that they all had names. Names like Flower Meadow, Forest Heights, Clear River. And I thought, how odd to completely remove an ecosystem only then to name it after it, kind of an ode to the nature that was lost. And as I would walk through these neighborhoods on my way to the newly built school to keep up with this population boom, I had all these questions, right? Questions like, why was nature so often pushed to the edges? Why was it an afterthought? Why was it that nature was so often treated as decoration rather than the foundation? And these questions didn't go away. In fact, I became obsessed, you could say. So I thought, what better than to turn it into a career? So I became an ecological engineer, which is essentially someone that dedicates their lives to figuring out how we can build better places for both people and nature. Not just for the two to coexist, but in fact to live together, to thrive, for both to thrive. And now I spend my time researching those things, writing about them, podcasting about them, speaking about them to audiences like yourselves. And then 2 years ago, everything changed again. I became a mother for the first time. And it was then that my once very professional mission became one that was very personal and also highly urgent. Because I think there's nothing like becoming a parent that makes you reflect quite deeply on your own childhood. And in doing so, seeing that deep human need for nature, that rewiring in our DNA that we're built for nature, I think we don't see that as well as we do reflected in our children. They're closer to the source, you could say. And I think when we think about children and their disconnection to nature, we realize that it's not just children, right? Nature deficient adults create nature deficient children. This is something that affects all of us, that nature deficiency. And I think so often technology is to blame for that. And sometimes that blame is fair. But as I've come to realize that technology can actually, weirdly enough, be our most powerful ally in restoring that connection. Not because we should have to, but in fact, because I think that is the only opportunity that we have to really communicate that change that we want to see. Right? Technology allows us the opportunity to make nature legible, tangible, to give it a voice, to map it, to measure it. And I call all of that the Internet of Nature. Now, of course, we humans built the internet to connect to one another, to improve our efficiency, to make us more powerful. But what if we expanded our notion of the internet to include the natural world around us? What would that mean? What would that mean for both us humans, but also all of the non-human species that we share our world with? Now, I first talked about the Internet of Nature for a TEDx talk. In fact, it was through the preparing of that talk that I realized this thing needed a name, and so the Internet of Nature. And then I talked about it for the academic world, and then it wasn't until 2021 that I started talking about it in the non-academic world through a podcast called the Internet of Nature podcast. And it was through that that my world truly opened up, because I realized this was something that was much bigger than the ivory tower of academia. This was, in fact, something that was already happening. And through the podcast, I got to speak to the people and the projects at this nexus of nature, technology, and people, and got to meet some wonderful people like Tom, who you just heard from, who was a guest on season 3 of the show. And it was all those stories and all of those projects that I was hearing about that led me on a bit of a worldwide tour to go and see some of them for myself. And it was there where I realized I had more than enough for the book that I'd always wanted to write. And that was, look at that, The Nature of Our Cities, which was translated into Dutch as the Natuur van onze steden, which you can imagine as a Dutch Canadian was a fabulous milestone. And it was in that book that I don't necessarily explore the question of why we should add more nature into our communities, but in fact, what is stopping us? And specifically, what tools can we use to actually get us there? Now, the book talks about a bunch of different ideas, everything from AI-powered firefighting robots to tracking snail evolution and what that can teach us about the urban heat island effect, which you'd also heard about just now. I look at all of these different projects, and what I want to do with you today is give you 3 takeaway ideas. These ideas are not for scientists, planners, and architects. There's enough of that in the book. These ideas are for you, the everyday person using tools that you already have at your disposal. Sound good? All right. Number 1, let us start small, very small, like 1 square meter small. And that is the silent revolution of the facade garden, geveltuin in Dutch. The facade garden concept is simple, right? You live in a house or an apartment building, you take up a few tiles. There's a competition for this in the Netherlands called tegelwippen. You might have heard of it. You can compete to win the golden watering can, but that to the side. You remove these tiles, you add soil, microbes, native flora, and watch the different species come calling. Now, the crazy thing is, it sounds small, right? So how much impact can this possibly have? Well, that was a question that some researchers at Leiden University have, so they decided to study it. And they did that by looking at 100 square meters of facade gardens across Amsterdam and The Hague. And they found in those 100 square meters, small area, they found 235 different species of plants and 154 types of insects. Now, this gentleman here, he is in fact not passed out drunk on the streets of Amsterdam. He is searching for these plants and insects, but he's doing this the old-fashioned way, with jars, nets, and a whole lot of patience, as you can imagine. But even here, the Internet of Nature comes in, and that is through the diopsis camera. Now, this was invented and created by researchers at the Naturalis Biodiversity Center, also in Leiden. And what they've done here is created something relatively simple. Essentially, insects land on this yellow landing page that you see, much like how insects are attracted to flowers. And once they land on that, these insects are not trapped, but a sensor goes off and a photo is taken. And that is when the power of AI gets to work, classifying these, identifying the species, and then estimating its biomass as well. Now, this is revolutionary because we've never been able to objectively measure and track and monitor the amount of insects in a given area. So this is really interesting. The idea here is to create a living dashboard of insect biodiversity, because insects, in fact, are one of the best proxy species that we have for overall ecosystem health. If the insects are happy, it tends to be that the rest of the ecosystem is happy too. Now, why does all of this matter? Well, you might remember a couple of years back, there was headlines about the so-called insect apocalypse. And that was due mainly to one study where they found that insect populations had decreased by 75% in the past 50 years. Pretty daunting stuff. But it is, in fact, these small microhabitats that might be able to fuel insect life close to us. Now, why does that matter, close to us? Because these microhabitats, I believe, can be really, really powerful pressure points for macro change. So let's zoom out a little bit more, not just to the facade garden, but in fact, think about little lots that might be able to fit between buildings or on a schoolyard. You might think about the projects pioneered by Sugi. Now, Sugi is an organization founded by a Belgian woman named Elise van Middelen. And Elise started with a simple mission in 2019. Can we rapidly revitalize, rejuvenate, rewild underutilized urban lands? So think about this much like they do in their own marketing and communications. They talk about Sugi, these pocket parks, pocket forests that they create, much like urban acupuncture, these pressure points within the ecosystem where you're bringing in energy and life force. So this is a project that you see here from the Galle School in Charleroi. And schoolyards are one of the most impactful areas that we can do this. There's also a project that they've done at the South Bank Centre, this concrete slab in the middle of downtown London. Think about the amount of people that are passing by here every day and having a radically different experience because of these 100 square meters of pocket parks that have been created. Now, Sugi has been doing this for 6 years, and in that time, they've managed to plant over 240 pocket parks in 24 countries across 6 continents, including 17 right here in Belgium. So I want to challenge each and every one of you today to think about what is an area in your community that you could do this, or perhaps partner with Sugi to do this. Is it perhaps that vacant lot behind your local supermarket? Is it your kid's school? Is it the underutilized rooftop of your office building? Where could you be rewilding your community? Because it's not that we don't have the space, it's about thinking about that space in a radically different way. The thing is, not all nature needs to be planted. And that brings me to idea number 2. Most of the nature that we have in our cities is in fact already here. We've just lost touch with it, lost connection with it. We've seemingly taken a lot of it for granted. And I think we feel this very powerfully with the trees, specifically the older trees that we have in our neighborhoods, right? Trees that we walk by every day without so much as glancing up at them. We only realize it once they're gone. Now, this is Harry the tree. And I could actually hear Harry coughing before I could see him. And as I got closer and closer and closer to Harry, he started telling me about the chronic asthma that he had been dealing with ever since the highway he was planted beside got busier and busier. And this is Marijke. Marijke is a 100-year-old oak tree in the middle of a town square who, although elderly, was very well in touch with her neighbors until, that is, they expanded the road. And now, since her roots have been cut, she is no longer in touch with her neighbors, and she has become so terribly, terribly lonely. Now, Harry and Marijke are two of 6 talking trees in the Reuzen van Noord, or Giants of North, audio tree talking tour created by Puk van Dijk. Now, if you get a chance to visit Amsterdam, I highly recommend that you go and listen to these 6 talking trees, because what makes it so magical is this is not your average audio tour where you're scanning a QR code at every stop. This works based on geolocated sound, which basically means you press go and you start moving through this route, and based upon where you are, your GPS location triggers the next audio segment, which is why I could hear Harry before I saw him. Now, this is so magical, and it's also extremely cost-effective and replicable. I mean, we could have this in every neighborhood if we wanted to, because technology here is not the distractor. It is, in fact, the facilitator of fantastic storytelling. And I can tell you one thing, once you hear a tree's story from the tree's mouth, you cannot unhear it. And what would that do? What would that do to communities worldwide if we understood the plight of what urban trees are going through? Now, you don't need to have a tree talk at you to foster this connection with trees. In fact, there are many other ways that we can talk to trees on the internet. A couple of my other favorites is Bowie the birch. Bowie the birch is one of the world's first tweeting trees, a birch with its own Twitter account. And through this project, he is able to tweet about, through this sensor network that he's connected into, is able to translate that data into human language so we understand Bowie. And he can tell us things like, I'm thirsty, maybe you might consider giving me a drink of water on this particularly unseasonably hot day. There's also the wish tree, which is one of 15 texting trees in Halifax, Canada, created by Julietta Sorensen-Kass. She gave 15 trees their own phone number. You can actually text them and get a reply. Kind of a funny way to talk to a tree, but one that I think many people could relate to. And the other is the weeping myrtle, one of 70,000 trees with its own email address in Melbourne. Created by Yvonne Lynch and her team. She was the head of urban ecology and urban forestry at the time, and they were struggling with an issue, which was that every time they emailed their general email address about a problem with a specific tree, they always had to have a lengthy conversation about, well, which specific tree are you talking about? And so the idea, let's give every tree an individual email address, streamline our operations. What they didn't expect is that people started writing love letters to these trees. First it was a couple hundred, then it was thousands, then it was not just Melbourne, the rest of Australia, and soon it was the entire world. This project went completely viral. And now there's other replicates around the world. In fact, the Texting Tree project was inspired by the Email a Tree project in Melbourne. The thing is, when we give nature a communication channel, if we give ourselves a way to communicate with nature, people show up, I think, as is evidenced in these projects. But what if we didn't have to wait for it to go viral? What if, in fact, we could be a little bit more intentional with this? It might look something a lot like the City Nature Challenge. Now, the City Nature Challenge is a relatively simple concept. The idea is, can we take 4 days, always typically at the end of April, and invite the community using the app iNaturalist, which some of you might already have on your phone, which can help you ID different insects, flora, fauna. Can we invite people to use that app and document as much biodiversity around them as they can? Well, that was started in 2016 by 2 women, Lila Higgins and Allison Young. And Lila at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County and Allison at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco were looking for ways to engage the public in the work that they were doing. So they came up with this challenge, the City Nature Challenge, and that was 10 years ago. And for the first couple years, it was a rivalry between Los Angeles, San Francisco, a couple other neighboring cities joined, and before they knew it, 10 years later, they had nearly 1,000 cities participating, more than 100,000 people worldwide, recording 3.3 million observations, and collectively identifying 75,000 species, of which nearly 4,000 are either endangered or thought to be extinct. Pretty incredible, right? I was absolutely enamored with this project, so I wanted to travel to the epicenter of City Nature Challenge success, and that is La Paz in Bolivia. Yes, a very biodiverse city, but otherwise a relatively unknown city that has absolutely dominated the City Nature Challenge for the past 4 years. That means for the past 4 years, they have gotten the most amount of people participating, the most amount of species identified, and the most amount of observations made. So I was there on assignment for National Geographic to make a documentary about what exactly made La Paz such a winner. Well, what I discovered there is it had everything to do with not just the fact that they had advertisements in buses about the upcoming City Nature Challenge, which is pretty cool if you think about it. Talk about bringing nature into the daily discourse. But it was the fact that they had embedded the City Nature Challenge in nearly every school's curriculum. So this was not some extracurricular activity that you could voluntarily participate in. No. In fact, I met a biology teacher and interviewed her for the documentary, who told me during the City Nature Challenge days, she does not let her students come back into the classroom until they have identified at least 200 species each. The City Nature Challenge, the thing that's incredible about it is not just the participation, getting people involved in nature that would normalize not really care. It's also about some of the most incredible discoveries. So in La Paz, this top image that you see, that is an endemic blueberry bush. It had not been seen in La Paz or recorded in over 100 years. The bottom image is the Bolivian snake, which, despite its very common name, had not been recorded by ecologists in over 40 years. Both of these species were rediscovered, observed, there was evidence taken of them by high school students. Of course, they didn't know what they are when they took the photo, but in fact, they led to brand new scientific discoveries. So again, I was deeply inspired by what I saw in La Paz, so I thought, I gotta organize one of these for myself. So I did that in Curaçao, a small Dutch island in the Caribbean that is known to be quite a rugged, dry place, but it in fact boasts a whole bunch of biodiversity. I did it there because I spend a lot of time there, family there, and there was already a fantastic team in Amsterdam doing this. So the thing about Curaçao is that it has this perception about being such a dry and rugged place, in fact, boasts a lot of biodiversity, and that biodiversity is under rapid threat of growing tourism and development, not unlike many other island states across the world. And they had never had a full-scale biodiversity survey then. So I teamed up with Femi Mo and Cindy Amon that you see there at the top, two nature-loving entrepreneurs on the island, and we decided to bring this to the island for the first time. And we are very proud that in our first year, this past April, we not only got 10,000 observations, some 300 people involved, we identified over 1,200 species. I mean, we got headlines in the media, the local media, about this because most people didn't even realize that many different birds, insects, plants, fish, corals, sponges even lived in Curaçao. So we were also very, very proud that of that 1,200 species, we also made a scientific discovery of our own. This is a picture of a cactus. And when the person who found it showed us the picture, uploaded it to iNaturalist, there was no hits that came back. So we thought it kind of looked like a cactus that you might find on Aruba. Maybe it's an Aruban cactus that made its way to Curaçao. But in fact, after consulting with cactus experts around the world, and yes, those people exist, they told us, no, this cactus has never been seen before in the world. You have made an entirely new scientific discovery. And the thing is, the woman who found this, she's not a biologist, she's not a botanist, she was just someone that was hiking, took a photo, turns out to make a whole new scientific discovery. And that's the thing about the City Nature Challenge. You never quite know what you're going to get. I did some research and did a little digging since we're so close to Brussels here. In Belgium, so far, the only city to have organized the City Nature Challenge is Brussels. And in that, this past year, identified some 500 species with 51 people. So, we can do better, right? So get in touch with the organizers or organize your own in your community, because this is a fabulous initiative. And all jokes aside, of course, we talk about, species counts and observation counts, but the real crux of the City Nature Challenge is, of course, connection, that piece of connection. And I think no one said this better than David Attenborough when he said, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. The City Nature Challenge is about bringing that experience to people, about allowing them to have that first interaction with nature. So, to recap, the 3 ideas. Number 1, I want you to go home and I want you to consider where you might plant a pocket of native plants and count the insects that come calling. I want you to give a tree, or 6 if you're feeling ambitious, a voice and help your neighbors listen. And I want you to join or host your very own BioBlitz. Take part in the City Nature Challenge and be shocked and surprised at what grows around you. So you have homework to do. You might be thinking with all of this, okay, interesting stories, but what exactly do I do with this? What does this all mean? I want you to think about these specific applications of the Internet of Nature like dating apps for nature. A dating app might be able to facilitate that first interaction, right? Spark a new connection, help you make the first move. But like any meaningful relationship, it's what happens IRL, in real life, that really matters, right? Building trust, building connection, building longevity of that relationship. So with that note, I want to ask you one question, and that is, what is your first move? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadina. Wow. Thank you for teaching us about the power of citizen science and this BioBlitz. It's amazing what it can do.
It really can, yeah.
Can I ask you 2 more questions?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's have a seat. I'm still a bit blown and struck by the ideas you shared. And this is the moment that I take my phone to make a selfie, but I forgot where I put my phone. Oh, there it is. There it is. We'll do it later. We'll do it later. One interesting thing about the talking trees. It's funny because weeks ago, months ago, I had the same idea in my own town.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Edegem. Edegem is a small town, 15 minutes from Antwerp, and I thought, yes, let's practice some ecological guerrilla and put QR codes on noble monumental trees. But then there is this voice in my head that says, nobody's gonna care. Just nobody's gonna do it. Do you recognize that? And do you have advice on how to
I definitely recognize it through now going through the experience of organizing the City Nature Challenge for the first time, because that was something that Femi, Cindy, and I discussed many times at late nights at the kitchen table. How are we ever going to get people to care? But I think kind of to what Tom was saying earlier too, that people feel quite desperately that they want to do something with nature. They just don't know exactly where to start and what to do. And that was really the focus of this presentation, is to make it hyper local, because I think that's where that sense of connection counts.
Yeah.
And you never quite know who's listening. You never quite know who's looking. I always think about it this way, like how often are you walking around in whatever community you might be, and you see a particularly beautiful garden, or maybe a facade garden, or just a balcony that's overflowing with vegetation, and you see the bumblebees doing their work. How much joy does that bring you when you walk past it? And the person that took all the effort to do that will never know how much joy it brings to the hundreds of passerbys. So I say, do it. Install the QR codes.
Cool. Interesting. And yeah, the examples you gave motivate me to actually practice it. Something else, I always think, and maybe that's a limited perspective, I always think that there is something generational going on. Like, for instance, I live in a neighborhood with a lot of elderly people. And when I have conversations and small talking chats with them, I often think, oh, they have a totally different mindset on nature. They want to kill the insects and the bees and the wasps, or they want to treat the weeds with harsh chemicals. And somehow it's not easy for me to really resonate with them.
Sure.
And do you have advice on that?
I think something that's really helped me is to meet people where they are. Like there's something that people care about and you can relate that back to nature. Like, is it, for example, that their grandchildren come and play? Is it that they enjoy sitting out in the shade? Is it that they enjoy the bird song, for example? There are these little things. And if that doesn't work, you can just hit them with the cold, hard evidence that living in a greener neighborhood means they're going to live longer, healthier, happier lives. And then people start to listen.
Okay.
I actually think that talking about urban greenery through the lens of health is one of the most powerful perspectives we have.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Nadina. Ladies and gentlemen, let the applause rain down like confetti from the sky for Nadina Galle. Thank you.